Good morning. The possibility of an early disengagement completely on Chinese terms in the 130-day Ladakh crisis has brightened up after the meeting of Foreign Minister Jay Shankar with Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Moscow yesterday. And this has been reflected in the joint statement issued thereafter. There are three big takeaways from the joint statement, which is basically five consensus points. The first takeaway is there will be no war. This is something that I have been saying right from the beginning of the crisis, that the chances of a war are zero. But this is a subject I'll come back to a little later. The second takeaway is that India's demand PLA restore the status quo ante of April 2020 will not be met. The PLA will not vacate the areas it has come to occupy as a consequence of its multi-pronged deep intrusions in eastern Ladakh. According to the Hindu newspaper, the PLA has come to occupy 1000 square kilometers of Indian territory. Just to put this into a perspective, the capital city of Delhi, the area is 1464 square kilometers, and now you can well understand what is 1000 square kilometers, the territory they are sitting on. And how did this happen? This happened because of the third takeaway. Because the reference point for the status quo ante of April 2020 was the 1993 line of actual control that has been mutually obliterated. The term line of actual control does not exist any longer. It has been replaced now by the phrase border areas, which is clearly said in the joint statement. In other words, India will now have the line of control with Pakistan and it will have a border area with China. These are the three takeaways. Now let us see the five consensus points which have been agreed in the joint statement. The first is that both the ministers have agreed that there is a need to follow the guidance from the consensus which has been reached between the two leaders. Now this consensus was reached between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping in June 2017 after the Doklam crisis in Astana. And the consensus was that differences should not become disputes. So both sides now have agreed, the foreign ministers, that differences should not become disputes. Now what are the differences? So the difference from the Chinese side was that they found the legal and the constitutional change made by India on the 5th of August 2019 and they creating the line, the Ladakh Union Territory, completely unacceptable. The Chinese were enraged when they found that Akshay Chin, on which they are sitting today and they say belongs to them, was included in the new maps printed by India. So this was their difference. So what they did was they changed the status quo on the ground in May 2020, this year. Now what they did was, after these deep intrusions, they said that while the 1993 agreement of peace and tranquility is applicable, but it is not applicable on the line of actual control of that time, because that line was never agreed on the maps, was never agreed on the ground by the two sides, and that is correct. So what they were demanding all along is that the line of actual control which actually exists is there in the document, in a letter written on 7th of November 1959 by Prime Minister Chow and Lai to Nehru. So they said that that is our claim line 59 and that is also the line of actual control because that is documented. So all the agreements 1993, 96 thereafter should be applicable on this 1959 line of actual control. the very fact that this difference of this line of actual control, which was at the heart of the Ladakh crisis, has now been removed completely. Nothing called line of actual control, it's now the border area. Now, after that, what the second thing, second point, the consensus is in the joint statement that the two foreign ministers, they agreed that the current situation in the border area is not in the interest of either side, and hence the urgency for disengagement. Now, this will be the challenge. The challenge will be both for the diplomats as well as the military people. How do you convert a border zone, a border area, into a area of peace? Because it is not demarcated. I mean, how do you get this on the ground and say, all right, this is a border zone or this is a demilitarized zone? So this is a challenge, and especially in the area of South Pangong So, where things have really heightened up in the last 1 week, 10 days, that this will prop up. So to meet this challenge is the third point, consensus, where they have said, both the sides have said, that we need to follow all the protocols and the agreements to ensure that there is no escalation. So this is really the crux of the thing. If, for example, the PLA has been saying in South Pangong So that if you see our old maps, they say, then the heights that today the Indian Army is occupying, or they came to occupy on the 29th, 30th of August, 29th and 30th August night, they belong to us, they are sitting on our territory. So how do you resolve this in the concept of a battle, of a border zone, is something that needs to be tackled. Once this is done, once the situation eases, then we come to this consensus 5. What this says is that there will be a need for new confidence building measures for those border areas. In other words, all the agreements until now, especially the 93 agreement and the 96 agreement, why they were important is because the 93 agreement clearly spoke of mutual and equal security. There is a huge disparity on the two sides. On the Indian side, the infrastructure is not very good, and then the terrain is very difficult. On the PLA, on the Chinese side, they have a flat terrain and excellent infrastructure. So this concept of mutual and equal security, which was enshrined in the 93 Agreement of Peace and Tranquility, is also out in the bin. It is no longer relevant. Similarly, the 96 Treaty Agreement spoke about how many troops can be kept there. It said not more than a division, which is 12,000 troops. Then it spoke about even the details about the guns, the mortars, the missiles, all that can be done there. Then it also spoke about the aircrafts and the unmanned aircrafts, that they should not come within 10 kilometers of the then line of actual control. But all this now has been set aside and new CBMs will be created. In other words, the Chinese will be able to retain their entire paraphernalia, which is supporting their 200,000 troops in Tibet Autonomous Region under their Western Theatre Command. Now, having said that, there is now the fourth consensus. Fourth consensus is that the two special representatives will keep discussing the boundary question. Now here, Jaishankar has been quoted as saying in Moscow that India does not consider the development of India-China relations to be dependent on the border settlement. In other words, he says that the two are not linked. The border, all that is required is peace and tranquility, and if that is achieved, then India does not want to go backwards. Now this is important. This is perhaps a reference to all the commercial and the trade sanctions which have been imposed on China by India during this crisis, that perhaps they all will be reviewed now. to restore the relation, to put the relation on an even keel, to try and bring some mutual trust between the two countries. So the big takeaways, or let's put it like that, that the price of creating the Ladakh Union Territory is, number one, what used to be called the line of actual control, now it has shifted well deep westwards. Number two, the big challenge is the border areas and how to demilitarize, how to demarcate these border areas and where they exactly are. Number three, because new confidence building measures will be required, so Western Theatre Command continues to retain any amount of equipment, training, habitat, ecosystem, all that they have created in the last 3 years in the Tibet Autonomous Region, which gives a massive disadvantage to the Indian side. Number four, India perhaps has agreed to also review the trade and commercial sanctions that it imposed on China. Now, what do the Indians get in return? So the Indians, certainly now that difference of the Ladakh Union Territory seems to have been dissolved. It no longer exists. This is what the Chinese seem to be saying. And number two, the prospect of a war have been averted. Mind you, the threat has not gone down. If any, the threat has gone up. Why it has gone up is that we have seen in the last fortnight or so that they could do exercise, the PLA could do exercise by getting their assets from other theatre commands also. So they have been practicing, so the threat remains of the forces in being, but the war has been averted if the disengagement now happens. Why this is good is because in a way it has, what has come to light is that our retired generals, our analysts, they seem to be putting the LC template on the border areas. It is the LC template that you look at, you try and dominate heights, you try and look at the valleys. This doesn't work against the PLA. PLA warfare is entirely different. So now perhaps this gives the opportunity. This is perhaps a bright thing that has happened to review our two-front war, to see that because these two wars are so different from one another, how do we fight them, or can we fight them? But on the negative side, India certainly will not be able to bring back, even after disengagement, all the troops that it sent forward. It can perhaps after some time bring some of them back, but plenty will still have to be retained, a habitat will have to be created, an ecosystem will have to be created, some sort of a training will need to be given to them, for the simple reason that the threat still remains. So this calls for perhaps a deeper introspection about having two live borders. One is a live line of control with Pakistan, and a line of and the border area with China. Thank you so much. Now I would request, as I always do, if you like this video, please do subscribe. It is free. Thank you.